At the United Nations General Assembly, Nigeria has called for a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Minister of Defense Mohammed Badaru spotlighted Nigeria's role in global peacekeeping, citing its involvement in 41 missions and deployment of over 200,000 troops since 1960. He argues that Nigeria's contributions alongside Africa's growing role in maintaining international peace makes the case for a permanent African presence on the Security Council. He also called for more global action to combat terrorism and arms trafficking, particularly in the Sahel region. Joining me now to discuss Nigeria's call for a permanent seat on the UN Security Council is Ambassador Joe Keshi, former Nigerian diplomat with extensive experience in international relations. Great to have you, Ambassador.
Good evening, Constance, and how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you. Well, you're aware of efforts by the Global South to reform the United Nations Security Council. They argued that it will bring fresh perspectives to different issues such as climate change, security challenges, global trade, and the rest of that. From your view, do you think there has been progress made on that front? Are we still on course, or is there much more work to be done?
Well, thank you very much, Constance. On this issue, a couple of years ago, it was a hot issue at the United Nations General Assembly. It was on the table, for serious discussion. And the regions that were seeking to have representation at the Security Council, everybody was making some serious efforts to come to a consensus on who represents some of this region. But I'm not too sure, Constance, that today, that the issue of the Security Council expansion, is part of the global discussion at the United Nations General Assembly going on in New York. The global situation is so chaotic. The conversation going on in New York today, from every news report, it's about the crisis in the Middle East, the Hezbollah, Israel war, the war situation in Gaza, and of course you have the Ukraine and the Russian war. These are serious global security issues, and the fear of its expansion. And of course, a number of people have been talking of possibility of a third world war. These are issues that are occupying the minds of the leaders as they gather in New York for this year's, hunger. Beyond that, Constance, there are other issues that we need to put into context. Within the African region itself, I'm not sure that there's a consensus on how to approach this issue and who is to represent, the African continent itself. And it's not only within the African continent you have disagreement among members as to who should be the candidate for for if the United Nations Security Council is expanded. So that is one, that's another issue. And of course, the last issue for me is that today, in comparison to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, our diplomacy is not where it should be. It's not strong enough that I even fear that if we mount a campaign, how successful, would we be? As we speak, for over almost 2 years now, very soon it will be 2 years, we have no ambassadors, in any of our missions abroad. And these are important elements that are needed if we are going to embark on such, a journey, because it will require a lot of lobby and experienced hands to deal with other countries where we have ambassadors. Today, we don't even have ambassadors in a number of places. Our diplomacy today is also not as strong as it should be for so many reasons, not to talk of our own internal contradictions. I was listening to your last guest. People like your last guest do not even realize, given all what he was saying, that actions some of them take in this country affect the global world perspective of Nigeria. So even internally, we need to address some of our own internal contradictions. so that when the time comes, the time is not ripe. And the last point I need to make on this issue, I'm not even sure that, let me use a popular word we use in Nigeria, that the fathers of this world, the owners of the world, the advanced countries, that expanding the United Nations, is what they want to hear now or what they want to discuss. So for me, we still have an opportunity to do a lot of repairing some of, doing a lot more at home to take care of some of our internal contradictions. We can't even organize, look, like you rightly pointed out to your guest, every election in Nigeria in recent time is decided by the courts, not the people. And we claim we are a democratic nation, and yet every time you go for an election, either INEC has a problem, or the political parties are protesting, or the people are not satisfied, and you call this a democracy? No. Look, these are some of these things, the strength of your economy, the peace in your country, your democratic practice. These are some of these things that will help us when the time comes. But my final say is that, look, it's not an issue that will be on the table this year, but we need to begin to get ourselves prepared so that any time it comes up, we are ready, we are strong, and we have the diplomatic strength, the capacity to launch a very powerful campaign and make a good case for Nigerian membership of the Security Council.
Ambassador, you've made a couple of brilliant points. And let me follow up on that. You talk about the focus at the United Nations General Assembly today. It's about the crisis in the Middle East, Ukraine, and the rest of them, and a possible wider war around the world. But doesn't it then indicate that this is the time that you actually need that expansion of the UN Security Council? Because when we look at Gaza, for instance, the efforts that have been made in order to bring together or cobble together a ceasefire has failed because the permanent members always sort of torpedo it. So isn't it time that you continue to put this matter on the front burner, on the table? It doesn't have to be Nigeria alone, but the global south.
No. Look, I said it is good we continue to remind the world that we need to democratize the Security Council. But today, that is not exactly the focus of the leaders that are gathered today in the United Nations. But, as you rightly pointed out, it's an issue we should continue to put on the table every time there's, hunger. But I also make the point that by the time they all come back, if they do manage to solve the crisis and without going to an expanded war and possibly a third war, which I don't think would occur anyway, we see how Nigeria itself, that is putting the issue out there, needs to begin to do a lot of things practically at home to ensure that when eventually there's a kind of global peace, and people can now come on to this crucial issue of expanding the Security Council. We are ready. We are in a very advantageous position. We are in a competitive position, to clean the seat. This is my argument.
Points about we don't have ambassadors for more than 100 missions around the world for almost a year, more than a year. Militarily, we're not that strong. Economically, we're struggling. Locally, there are security issues, whether it's terrorism, banditry, kidnapping, and the rest of them. You also make the point about building alliances and partners so that when the time is right, we can make that leap. Can I ask you, why do you think Nigeria is currently not part of BRICS? Is it something that we should be part of?
Well, look, I have my own views of, BRICS, and a number of my colleagues actually think that we should be there. Look, we are already in too many organizations. Almost all these organizations have the same, objectives, and possibly with slight, differences and things like that. But one of the strong arguments being made, in terms of BRICS, is the fact that it will counter some of the actions and behavior of the Bretton Woods institutions. Look, because we've been in this world for how many years? So many organizations have been set up, but these organizations have over the years even grown stronger and continue to control the world economy. You know, for me, it is not creating new institutions that would, that would guarantee, us a place at the global stage. I think it's how we organize ourselves, how we build our own society, and how we use that as a springboard. Look, I give you an example, which most people don't remember. Remember that for 20 years, the Chinese closed the country to themselves. And when they emerged during that, the Chinese Olympics, the world saw what China was doing internally for 20 years. And today, China is a global player that everybody is reckoning with. You understand what I'm trying to say? So, what I'm trying to say is that it's not the nature whether you're a member of one institution or the other that gives you international prestige. It is the nature of how strong you are at home, how strong you organize yourself, how strong your military is, how strong your economy is, and the influence you are able to exert when you go around the world, and the respect that you earn as a result of, who you are or what the country represents itself. This should be our focus at this time. Again, I make the point. Why should we do that at this point in time? Because someday soon, this issue of the United Nations Security Council will be back, will be strong again on the table. By that time, we should be ready to be very competitive. Today in Africa, we are not the largest growing economy, even though we continue to deceive ourselves here that we are. There's Morocco that is doing very well. There is South Africa. There is Egypt. These are likely to be our competitors. How do we prepare ourselves to face this competition? How many of these countries in Africa today are ready to support and back Nigeria? How many? Even within the ECOWAS sub-region, we've lost 4 countries already. We've lost 4 countries, except we're able to get them back. And we cannot even guarantee that we would gather everybody within the region to support us. So we need to do a lot more. Get me clear. I'm not saying that Nigeria should not bid for the post. All I'm saying is that today the world is in such a chaotic situation that it's not a serious conversation going on in New York. But someday soon, the issue will be back on the table. Nigeria should be prepared for when that issue is back on the table.
I'm sure that the government in power knows and understands all these failings that you have enumerated. Also, the Minister of Defense, who spoke to this Security Council membership, is aware. Why do you think he would, knowing all of this, be making such a move at this time?
No. Look, it's a good move. I'm not saying it's not a good move. We need to consistently remind, look, when you go to a conference like this, you speak based on your own national interest. This is our own concern. We are not concerned so much with Gaza or Ukraine, Russia, and the rest of it. No, we have the right to express our own interest. Again, the point I keep making is that we need to keep the issue alive. To remind the world, when you guys come to your senses and when you finish the wars you've created for yourselves, we have to come back and address this issue. The second argument I make is that as the rest of the world are focusing on the issues that concern them, they will come back to this issue someday soon. Let us ensure that we in this country, we are ready to be competitive, because there are countries that over the years, in this continent are growing faster than us, are more stable, more organized. And the world is taking notice of all this. So we should find a way to prepare ourselves to equally be competitive when the time comes. That's just, if you want me to use the football, analogy, when you say when the league was going to start and the championship, the guy said, look, We've done it before. We are again about to start. So everybody should be ready. So we should be ready that when the time comes. Look, if in a couple of years ago we had 1 or 2 competitors, today we have about 3 or 4 competitors in this continent who want to be in the Security Council. So let's be very clear about that and begin to prepare ourselves. My argument is still that we need to continue to keep the issue on the table. But within the time available, let's do a lot more in the country to ensure that when the time comes, we are able to compete with the rest of the world. Or the rest of the people from states on the African continent.
The countries that we have lost in the West African sub-region, is there anything at all we can do to regain these countries, or is that done from your diplomatic experience?
No, look, I think with time, I think with time, with time, with the nature of our diplomacy and how we deploy that diplomatic footwork, to get them back, and there are institutions, there are people, there are organizations that we can use, particularly our neighbor Niger, who should be our first and primary, concern. The last time I think the Chief of Defense Staff was in Niger, if my memory serves me right, or if the information I read or heard was correct, that's a good move, By the time you begin to have these interactions, some rationality will begin to come into it. Some reality will begin to play out. I'm very confident that, give or take, a couple of years from now, they might be back. But we also should be ready to ensure that we play a role in getting them back. Look, we must understand that we, and to some extent Togo, that has, probably lost its, with all due respect, lost its senses given what the young, now older Yadema is doing, wanting to overstay longer than his father. We were the architects of ECOWAS, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we maintain that organization as best as we can, that it grows from strength to strength. And by the way, ECOWAS objectives, we haven't even started trying to, security issues has occupied ECOWAS since its creation, but it's time now we find a way to return back to the issue of economic integration, because at the end of the day, that will also be to the advantage of Nigeria.
Ambassador Joe Keshi, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you. Well, that's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.